Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I want to talk to you about the season 4 premiere of Star Trek Discovery. It was an episode called
Kobayashi Maru,
which is interesting because it's always been a sort of touchstone for me with Star Trek on Xbox and PlayStation. That's my screen name. So it's just something that's always been a recurring thing in my Star Trek fandom. So it was interesting that this episode is called
Kobayashi Maru.
And not only is it called
Kobayashi Maru.
it's sort of about the Kobayashi Maru. But we'll get into that. So as the episode opens, we see that they're still using the spore drive, and I guess, that's fine. It's just a reminder of the fact that the thing originated in the pre-Kirk era, which doesn't make any sense. So I just wish they'd stop using it, but they won't. Anyway. They're using it, and they're going around giving dilithium to different worlds that were once part of the Federation that had fallen out of touch with the Federation because nobody could warp anywhere during, the burn. And, not all of these worlds are pleased to see the Discovery and Captain Burnham. But nonetheless, they are trying to make contact with these societies and sort of bring them back into the fold. And there was a very cool scene where you see this play out, and it took place on a planet of humanoids that were all like white from head to toe, but they could manifest wings and kind of fly like butterfly people. It was really strange. They were both technologically advanced and kind of primitive at the same time. It was weird. But anyway, Burnham goes to this planet with Book, and she's trying to bring them dilithium, and they're like, yeah, we don't want anything from you, so we don't want to hear it. And they sort of bumble themselves into a conflict on this planet of, again, beings that are technologically advanced and were at one time warp capable before the burn, but also at the same time to have sort of a primitive disposition. And this conflict sends them running from a mob in just the same way that Kirk and Spock are running from an angry mob of aliens on their planet in the beginning of Into Darkness, which in this case, Book and Michael end up resolving by remotely fixing some satellites that the inhabitants of the planet had in orbit to help them fly. It compensated for, I guess, anomalies in the planet's magnetic field that had come up over time. And so they adjust these satellites so that they function and fix the magnetic field, which allows the butterfly people to fly better. And this, of course, made it possible for them to give chase better. So Michael and Book had to keep running still, and they eventually end up reaching Book's ship and departing while leaving behind some dilithium, all of which does seem to score some points with the planet's inhabitants. So it resolved well, but it was not smooth. It was not smooth by any stretch of the imagination. Anyway, back on Kaminar, Saru gives a bit of a speech to his people, who seem to be living in harmony with the Ba'ul. And the speech is about avoiding isolationism, which is interesting because isolationism is a sort of way of existing that various countries have tried over the years, over the centuries in real life, to different degrees of success. America was one of those countries at one point. And so it's a topic that deals with the human condition in a way. And it also harkens back to prior Star Trek because, I don't think you could say, like, for example, the Romulans or Klingons or Vulcans were really isolationist during most of Star Trek, but they did tend to be homogeneous societies. So it was a little bit of that. And they were sort of closed to outsiders, because remember, the Klingons were sort of a stand-in for communism and communist Russia in the original series. So they kind of kept that sort of vibe going forward, even though they became allies with the Federation. The Romulans, the same thing. And the Vulcans, you know, of course, were very involved in the affairs of the Federation and Starfleet, but at the same time, Vulcan was a bit of a closed world, even up through Voyager, if I'm not mistaken. And certainly during TOS, we know that Kirk and so forth, McCoy didn't know anything about Spock's people's, you know, marriage rituals or reproductive rituals, and didn't know much about Vulcan tradition. In Amok Time, we see this. And certainly before that, in Archer's time, the Vulcans were very sort of hands off with the humans. I mean, they were involved. They were trying to shepherd them through becoming warp capable and whatnot, or more warp capable. But they were still kind of like, you know, we're keeping you on a short leash. We're not, you know, welcoming you into our bosom with open arms. So it was very much isolationist-ish. Isolationist-ish. So this is something that we've dealt with in Star Trek before. Certainly on Discovery, when Michael was trying to solve the burn, there was that cult. We saw that the Vulcan and Romulan cultures had sort of merged, but they still were kind of like, yeah, we don't want to deal with you. And they were very, you know, they were sort of pushing back against Michael trying to get help from them and solving the burn. So this is something that's gone on in Star Trek. So it's kind of interesting. Anyway, we end up seeing Burnham in a pretty cool dress uniform, because of course the uniforms have been updated for this season, when they found out that the gray ones they gave them at the end of last season literally blended into the walls of the set, and they couldn't like, it was just very dull looking on camera. So now it's the blue, gold, and red, but the dress uniform was a little different. It had like a white inside, kind of like the Monster Maroons, but it wasn't, you know, like puffy. It was flat, and you couldn't see very much. It was kind of like a priest's collar almost. And the tunic wasn't so much of a, you know, a pinned over. It was more like a over your head pullover kind of thing. Anyway, it was an interesting dress uniform. And then she and the new Federation president speak to what, if I'm not mistaken, was the first new class of the newly reopened Starfleet Academy. And during the president's speech, we end up hearing the phrase "new worlds and new civilizations" when she's describing Starfleet's original mission. So that was pretty cool. They also showed the new space dock, which was named after Archer, in which they were going to house, I guess, or more build than house new starships. And the one that was in there at the time was the new Voyager. So that was pretty cool. I thought the speeches were a little speechy, not preachy, but speechy, including Saru's. Although, again, I thought it was good that he had that speech because of the subject matter. But right in the beginning, we had speech. And it was like, okay, this is getting a little heavy-handed now, you know, like not so much preachy heavy-handed, but platitude heavy-handed, you know. It was like, okay, we got it, you know. So I thought that was a little much. But anyway, right after this, a distress signal comes in from an out-of-control Federation space station, or Starfleet space station, which is literally spinning out of control in open space. And the Admiral sends Discovery to help, because they can get there, of course, in a blink. And the Federation president decides to go along, much to Burnham's dismay. You know, she's brand new captain. She kind of feels like she's going to have someone over her shoulder, and also that it endangers the crew because she's a high value person. You know, it just sort of adds a burden to their mission. And she tells the Admiral, you know, she thinks the president is trying to, you know, the reason the president wants to go along is that she's seeking to up her political credibility by saying, you know, I've logged some space hours or whatever it is. And she literally says, I think the president is ticking off a box, you know, like on her resume. But it was kind of funny because, of course, Discovery has been accused of, as well as a number of other media entities, have been accused of ticking off boxes for doing things like having a black female lead and then a black female captain, and, you know, elevating women in the stories, and having a trans character, and sort of, you know, patting themselves on the back for it. and having a non-binary character and patting themselves on the back for it. And so it was just funny to hear her say that out loud, because the writers put that particular phrase in there just to sort of thumb their nose at people who accuse the show of ticking off boxes. But anyway, Book takes his leave of Discovery and visits his homeworld. And while there, he meets up with his brother and his nephew, and they go to a seemingly sacred spot. And they seem to experience a weird kind of bird-related event. Some birds do some crazy stuff. But Discovery then reaches the space station. Tilly, who is now a lieutenant, and Adira, who is now a Starfleet ensign, get to work using programmable matter to fix the station. After a conversation with the station commander and a conversation between the Discovery bridge crew, during which they uttered a whole lot of expressions that are in our current real world vernacular, which it always bugs me. Like, you got to utter one, but like 5, you're kind of pushing it. Like, stop it. Anyway, as this is going on, an environmental hazard threatens the station. I think it's the one that put them in the bad position to begin with, but they don't really say that I remember. Anyway, some stuff goes down, and it's also at this point threatening Discovery. So Burnham takes a worker bee to remove some space junk from one of the escape vessels docked at the space station, so the crew can get off before something bad happens to the station from this anomaly, which I guess they can't do by beaming. This prompts the Federation president to sort of say, "You're leaving the ship during a red alert. Like, what are you doing? You're the captain." And she says, "I've logged the most, hours in the worker bee. I should go." And the captain's like, "I don't think so." And she says, "Are you pulling me from the chair?" And the president says, "No." So she goes. But anyway, they have this sort of conversation, this confrontational conversation, I should say. We go back to Kaminar, and we see the character from last season, the Burn baby, whose name I forget. And he tells Saru that it's obvious to him that he longs to rejoin Discovery, and that, he doesn't have to stay on Kaminar for him, even though he promised him that he would help him reintegrate into, their society. Burnham's worker bee gets hit with debris because of this anomaly, and she ejects from it in an EV suit to complete the task at hand. And when the station commander panics and wants to do something rash to try to get out with his people, the president talks him out of it by sort of lying to him, saying that she's been to his homeworld and she's seen some of its wonders, and don't you want to get back to that? And can you let the captain and her crew help you? But it turns out that she lied, as I said, and only knew those things because she had read his file, which really was good on her part. That's kind of what you want to do, right? You want to have information, if you can have it, that will help you diffuse a situation or relate to someone in a way that helps things work to everyone's benefit. So it was actually pretty cool, but she kind of had to lie, and Burnham calls her on it. Meanwhile, Booker's ship, I guess he's on his way back to Discovery, whatever, is hit by the same anomaly or a similar anomaly, and it actually warps space and damages his ship. Back in Discovery, the president questions Burnham's methods upon her return as she deals with the continuing crisis, but again declines to pull her from the chair. And it was good to see Burnham challenged in the middle of her process by an authority. She really never was challenged in the first and second seasons. In the third season, she kind of is by the Admiral, but even there, she kind of continues to buck the system, and it's always after the fact, or often after the fact. This was in the middle of it, and it was kind of cool to see her sort of try to defend her actions in the middle of everything. Everyone gets off the station before it's destroyed, but the commander doesn't make it because the shuttle that left the space station sort of crash lands into Discovery, and he dies. The president and Burnham have yet another conversation, and they talk about how the president is evaluating people to be captain for the command of the new Voyager, which will soon be testing a new drive. But she doesn't think Burnham is ready because she doesn't believe in the no-win scenario because of her loss as a child, which left her always wanting to save everyone, which, it could be argued gives her a sort of dangerous blind spot, kind of like Ahab in Moby Dick, which of course also came up in Star Trek in First Contact, when Picard was sort of single-mindedly focused on not letting the Borg take over the ship, which was blinding him to the fact that they probably were going to take over the ship and that it would go badly for Earth after that, and that he needed to destroy the ship, which at first he resists because he very famously says,
"I will not sacrifice the Enterprise. We've made too many compromises already, too many retreats. They invade our space, and we fall back. They assimilate entire worlds, and we fall back. Not again. The line must be drawn here. This far, no farther."
He was basically stuck in the no-win scenario resistance mode. And so that's what the president thinks is, going on with Burnham, that she is someone who gets stuck in that same mode, which of course we know is true, and she does. And so she kind of says, you need to be open to the no-win scenario, which of course is the
Kobayashi Maru.
And she says, because you're not open to that, you were almost about to sacrifice the many for the few. And she levels it as a criticism, but we know that this is something that Kirk did, along with Scotty, McCoy, Uhura, Chekhov, and Sulu, when they rescued Spock, or retrieved Spock from Genesis. They all went in on that and decided to risk the many, which was themselves, to save the one. And so we've seen that before. Of course, when we saw it in Star Trek II, it was the reverse of the general axiom that Spock tells Kirk about in Star Trek II, when he says the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. But then he does, that whole thing goes back and forth. It repeats in Star Trek II, and then it's flipped on its head in Star Trek III. And so here it is again being discussed. You almost sacrifice the many to save the one, and you don't necessarily want to do that. But that's just one school of thought. The other school of thought is sometimes you do. Sometimes what makes us great is we put it all on the line to save one. So it was an interesting conversation, because you could look at that from two ways, and it's going to be interesting to see this play out thematically, I think, across the season. But Burnham's argument was, not only sometimes you do put it all on the line to save the one, but Burnham's sort of argument was, yeah, I don't believe in the no-win scenario, which of course was Kirk's famous thing. In Star Trek 3, two, that works out well for him, but it's something that's not necessarily always going to work out. So it was right for the president to bring it up. And it was interesting to see Michael's take on it, because we don't know if that take is going to evolve or not. So that'll all be very interesting. But I thought this scene showed that they put a lot of thought into writing this episode, and that maybe we're going to see some cool stuff thematically going forward. So here's hoping, crossed fingers. And, just to bring up past Star Trek again, Kirk and Pike, as I said, Kirk did this, the needs of the many and the no-win scenario and all that stuff. He dealt with those themes in his career. Pike kind of did as well, and struggled with those things. And they were also questioned by peers as well as superiors. So it's, I think, good that they're covering that ground again, because thematically it's important, and it deals with, as I said, the human condition, and those elements of the older Star Treks were always good. So I think it's good that they're doing it now. It's good to see that even a bunch of years in the future, humanity still struggles with some things. I think that shows us that we are always evolving, but that we haven't quite achieved perfection, and the human condition is still, a thing. Anyway, before the episode ends, Booker arrives at Discovery, having gotten there on autopilot because I guess he was incapacitated. And when he explains what happened to, his ship and what happened to him, Discovery tries to reach his homeworld, only discover that it's been shifted quite far out of its orbit. And when they actually locate it and throw the planet, an image of the planet up on the main viewer, we see that it has been fatally ripped apart by the anomaly. That the planet has basically been destroyed. It's still there, but it's not intact. It's fractured. And no one survived, which, of course, everyone is looking on with, stunned looks and appears to be very overwhelmed by this event, by the realization that all those people are gone and the planet is gone. Not the least of which, of course, was Book. So that's where they left it. So I thought it was a really good episode. I thought they covered some really good ground. And I think we're going to see them continue to do that. And I'm looking forward to the next episode. I don't really have anything bad to say about it, which is unusual because I always have something bad to say about Discovery. We'll have to see how well they continue to do when the new episodes come out. I'll be back with a review of the next episode once it airs. Until then, of course, I wish you all peace and long life.